Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Melissa Siegel and I'm a professor of migration studies. So I wanted to make sure that we are staying relevant with this series that we're doing right now and with this YouTube channel. And while it's really important to me to make sure that I'm bringing content and migration issues to the general public, I think that one of the most important things that is hitting us all today is the situation around COVID-19. So what I really wanted to do now was set up a whole series around migration and remittance related issues related to COVID-19. And so that's what I'm going to do. Within this series, I want to talk about a number of topics. I want to talk about how the pandemic and new restrictions on movements will affect global migration currently and in the future. I plan to look at issues like rights and protection of migrant workers, including their kind of living conditions and access to care. I want to look at protection of, for instance, migrants in detention, looking at situations of forced migrants in camps, and definitely looking at the effects of remittances, or the effects on remittances and the effects on families who stay back in their countries of origin. And I want to look also at the situation of return and returning migrants, as well as possibly changing perceptions of migrants during this period. So those are all some of the things I'd like to cover in this series. Please, though, feel free to comment, tell me what else you'd like to see, to ask me questions. Those are all things I'd really like to address on the channel. But today I want to kick off the first episode in this series talking about remittances more specifically. Now, within this, talking about remittances more specifically, there are a lot of things that we can discuss. So if you don't know what remittances are, what I'm talking right now about are more specifically financial remittances, or the money that migrants send back to their countries of origin, usually to their families, to their friends, but it could also be at a more community level. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about the basics of remittances, I will link in the description to another video that I've done just explaining the basics of remittances, so you can check that out also, maybe even before you watch the rest of this video. Now, of course, we know there are several different kinds of remittances, including financial monetary remittances, in-kind remittances, and social remittances. But today I'm just going to focus on the monetary remittances. And a lot of the work that I'm going to talk about, or a lot of the information that I'm talking about, is actually coming out of the World Bank. So the World Bank does a lot of research and a lot of work on migrant remittances, and they have been trying to keep more up-to-date numbers on what's going on these days with regard to migrant remittances. So just to give you a little overview, in 2019, remittances reached a record high. And especially going to low and middle income countries. So those countries who probably need those money transfers the most. So in 2019, remittances were estimated to be at $554 billion. Unfortunately, we have now seen that the World Bank is estimating or projecting that remittances will reduce by probably at least around 20%, meaning that for 2020, remittances are not expected to go over $45 billion. That is a reduction of $100 billion to low and middle income countries. So this is actually pretty serious. And I'm gonna put a graph up here showing what we've seen with regard to remittances over time and how that looks compared to other financial flows. What we know also is that because of the corona crisis, foreign direct investment is also likely to reduce even more. So right now it's projected to reduce in the range of around 35% to low and middle income countries, which means that remittances were already so important, but proportionally they're going to become even more important when we consider the other types of foreign flows of money that are likely to decrease even more. What we also know about remittances, which we've discussed also in some of the previous videos, is that in general, remittances seem to be more resilient than other financial flows. So again, looking at the graph here, you can see over time that yes, there have been little blips, for instance, during the financial crisis where remittances have reduced, but generally they've been much more smooth, much more stable over time than other financial flows, especially compared to foreign direct investment. And we already know that remittances are much more important than official development aid in pretty much all low and middle income countries. So what are we seeing now? Well, we see this large reduction in remittances across the globe, but we do see that certain areas, certain regions are likely to be hit harder than others. So for instance, I'm putting up a table here for you to see how it's projected, what we see over time for low and middle income countries, as well as the whole world, and then broken down by different regions. What we also see here is that very clearly remittances are not expected to rebound quickly. So both for 2020 and 2021, remittances are expected to stay much lower than they have been in the previous years. Some of the regions that are expected to be particularly affected are, for instance, Europe and Central Asia, as well as Latin America and the Caribbean and Sub-Saharan Africa. Europe and Central Asia, especially Central Asia, is expected to be highly impacted, also because of where migrants are generally going. So migrants there are generally going to more oil-rich countries in the region. Think about Russia, think about the Kyrgyz Republic and others, and Tajikistan. Tajikistan is a country where many people are migrating from. If you think about Azerbaijan, who is also another oil producer, as well as Russia and others, this is where a lot of migrants are currently going. And oil prices are also being heavily affected during COVID, which means that these countries that also rely a lot on oil to also balance their budgets for a lot of the spending are just not going to have that money available anymore for these large-scale building projects and many other things that often migrant workers are working in. So this is a number of reasons why we're seeing what we see today. Of course, there are just the larger impacts on the employment and wages of foreign workers. So in most countries that we see today, they've been very heavily hit now economically. We have lockdowns, travel bans, social distancing. All of this has affected economic life all over the world, as well as very much so in many of the countries of destinations where migrants go. If you're interested to learn more about where migrants go, where they're coming from, check out another YouTube video that I have on that, so you have a better idea of maybe some of the bigger areas in the world that could be more affected. But in general, we do see more migrants in developed industrialized countries. And we also know that those are some of the countries that have been hit the hardest, or also at least the first, with regard to numbers. That means that in many cases, migrant workers, who are often the most vulnerable and often the workers who are in the kind of first firing or first letting go jobs, they're going to be more impacted. So, for instance, now with many businesses not being able to open, with lockdowns in place, migrants are both not able to get to current employment and also just losing their jobs, meaning they're not having the same ability to earn money like they did previously. And again, many of them are also in sectors that are maybe a bit more vulnerable, like service sectors, food and beverage, things like that. At the same time, migrants face the risk of also just contagion of COVID-19, and then also maybe even the loss of employment and wages, and maybe also health insurance coverage, which can make it all harder for them to be able to send money back. Now, additionally, we know that there have been several lockdowns in labor camps and in dormitories also where migrant workers are residing. So that's all just made both contagion and their ability to get to jobs and things like that more difficult. And if they're not earning money, then they're not really able to send money back home. Another issue is that even if migrants maybe have savings or still are able to work, the lockdowns and the business closures have also heavily affected remittance service providers. So think of Western Union, MoneyGram, many other money transfer providers, banks, things like that. Many of them have had to also close down or reduce business hours or don't have the same kind of labor force that they did previously to COVID. So they're also coping with a different situation. So even if the migrants are able to send money, meaning they still have the money, it doesn't mean they have the physical options to actually send the money back. So they might not be able to go to these remittance service providers and things like that. That's more sending money in a formal way. Many people also send money in an informal way. That is just through hand carrying money, through maybe sending it with train conductors or others who are traveling back and forth a lot. And with all of the border closures, this has also become less possible. So in a number of ways, migrants are just not as able to send remittances like they used to. If we also look at the Sustainable Development Goals, for instance, one of the Sustainable Development Goals was also to reduce remittance costs. So we see that can be quite expensive often to send remittances to different parts of the world. And in the Sustainable Development Goals, one of the goals is to reduce remittance costs to an average of 3% in the entire world with no corridor over 5%. And what we're seeing right now is that, of course, there have been strides made to go towards these goals, but now because of everything we're seeing around COVID-19, many of these businesses have also been put under strain. And the fact that many of them, their costs are increasing, it's more difficult to do business at the moment, it makes it difficult for us to see faster shifts in the reduction of remittance prices. So it is the progress there is slower than we would expect. Because of course, remittance service providers have also been affected by lockdowns, shorter business hours, social distancing, and many of these other things. And what we see is that the relative importance of electronic transfers has really increased, but many migrants around the world don't necessarily have that as an option. They don't necessarily have the infrastructure available for that, or maybe even the knowledge. So these are areas that we definitely know where more can be done. Now, there are a lot of compounding effects also of COVID right now that we see are going to have greater effects into the future. So, for instance, many of the countries that are used to receiving remittances, in some countries, remittances are as much as 30% of GDP. They're an important source of income, sometimes an important source of tax revenue, if we think about it also just through like value-added taxes or sales taxes with money that's spent with migrant remittances. And this is now not going to be as available as it once was. Banks in many migrant sending countries rely on remittance inflows as a cheap source of foreign deposits, or just in general deposit financing, which is going to become less available. And banks are also then likely to see their operating costs, or in general, their financial sector is then likely to see their operating costs increase and less of an ability to lend money, for instance, to small and medium-sized businesses. Remittances are also often important for small and medium-sized businesses to start up businesses, to help with different investments. And so we're seeing kind of a double whammy here where small and medium-sized businesses might be losing both their remittance income sources and also not having access to that financing from financial institutions who are now also more strapped for cash. So there are a lot of things that can feed off of this. There could also be lower demand for services and products for many of these businesses, also because of the current COVID situation. So the prolonged crisis, which we know is going to happen, which we know that the economic effects of this are going to be further reaching into the future, are also then likely to put pressure on the labor markets in the rich countries where migrants are often going. And that means that migrants could lose their jobs, they could lose their residency status, and then also be forced to return home. If we think of also especially countries like in the Gulf states or Russia or others that are highly reliant on oil revenue, we know that many of those are going to see have seen oil prices drop, and then the economic activity that is affected as a result of this is actually quite high. And these are countries where there are a lot of migrants, where a lot of remittances are sent from. So there are so many other compounding effects of corona that we could be seeing into the future. We know that because fewer remittances are able to get back to countries of origin currently, this is probably going to have a big effect on instances of poverty, depth and severity of poverty, healthcare access, the ability, food security, the ability to also send children to school if that's even possible because of COVID and many other things. So unfortunately, it looks like we're going to see quite some detrimental effects of COVID on remittances. It also looks like they are not going to be easing anytime soon. For that reason, several international organizations as well as the UN have done a kind of remittances call to action and put into place a sort of work plan and suggestions for governments and international organizations to try to mitigate a lot of the effects that we're seeing right now. And I'll make sure to also link the information on that call to action below too. If you'd like to hear more about any of the topics I've discussed just now, please let me know and I can go into them in more detail. But I hope this already gives you a bit of an overview of how COVID-19 is affecting specifically remittances and how that can have a compounding impact on migrants themselves and especially their families, their communities, and their countries of origin. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe to my channel, turn on notifications, and please do engage with me. Ask questions and I'll make sure to get to them. I hope to see you next time in our next edition of Migration and COVID-19. See you next time. Bye-bye.